Chapter 46. Clever child. Nikita was impressed the toddler had figured out that to get to the ground, she'd be better off in her other form. I've never witnessed a shift at such close proximity. Never been trusted with it. Extraordinary, isn't it? Sasha said as Nadia began to run around the room, curiously exploring everything she could. Naya, be good. A small growl, a mischievous look, but the cub eased up her pace. Did you intend for me to fall for Lucas? Nikita wasn't expecting the question. That didn't matter. Her self-conditioning was too ingrained. Her expression held. No, she said, and it was the truth. I knew your shields against emotion were failing and that you needed a way out. I also knew Sai had left the net in the past to join changeling packs. It was meant to be a chance for you to find an exit route. Had Sasha not succeeded, Nikita's backup plan had involved a large amount of bloodshed. I would have rather you didn't mate with Hunter, she added. As Alpha, he's too much in the public eye. The idea was for you to disappear into DarkRiver. Instead, her daughter had become one of the key and highly visible members of the pack. A soft laugh that made Nadia utter what appeared to be a reciprocal growl. You can't control everything, mother. I learned that lesson when you came along. Until that moment, Nikita had been a perfect inmate of silence. Cold and hard and determined to rise to the top with pitiless grace. Carrying a cardinal empath of your violent strength had an undocumented effect on me. Which said something very interesting about all the women who'd come before Nikita. And about Nikita herself. When Sasha opened her mouth as if to ask for details, Nikita shook her head. There were some things she'd never say aloud, never admit, even to her daughter. That was too slippery a slope because the threat remained. In the world lived those who'd murder Sasha for being an E, for being the defector who'd brought a hidden revolution roaring into the light, and unbeknownst to her, for being a poster child for happiness beyond silence. Not only that, to the fanatics, Sasha had committed a second and third transgression, both of which they deemed unforgivable. First, she had bonded with an aggressive, unintelligent animal, and second, she'd given birth to a child with tainted blood. Idiocy and prejudice, all of it, but prejudiced idiots could be dangerous. Especially to a small, vulnerable child. Nikita looked at the panther cub currently chewing on the edge of the bedspread, out of sight of her mother's gaze. Nadia's eyes caught Nikita's. She froze. Then went back to her mischief when Nikita didn't give her away. It was so easy to win the trust of children, but this child would never be in a position where that trust could get her killed. Her alpha father and empath mother would never permit it. Neither would her deadly grandmother. Attention back on Sasha, she said. They told me you were flawed, broken, useless. I told you the same because it was the only way to keep you safe. Sasha shook her head, and for the first time today, Nikita heard anger color her daughter's tone. You could have found another way. A way that wasn't so brutal, that didn't make me question everything I knew about myself. No, Nikita would never second-guess the decisions that had kept her child alive. You were too soft, Sasha. Always have been. A harsh truth. I had to get you to protect yourself, make sure you weren't relying on me. If that had meant making her empathic child fear and despise her, so be it. You had to trust only yourself. Is it what you believe? That I'm flawed? Nikita went to answer, but decades of control kept her silent for long enough that Sasha turned away. She shoved past the control. No, she said. If I had, I would have never put you in a position of responsibility. Looking back at her, Sasha smiled, and it was a faint shadow of the expression. I should have figured that out, shouldn't I? Yes. One thing Nikita had always made clear. She didn't suffer fools. Laughter from her daughter this time, which made her granddaughter want to know what was going on. Jumping back onto the bed with a helping boost from her mother, Nadia shifted with the confidence of a changeling at home in either skin and allowed herself to be swept into Sasha's lap, making happy sounds when Sasha bent down to nuzzle her. There go another set of clothes. Sasha pretended to growl and bite her baby. I should start dressing you in flour sacks. Giggling, Nadia kissed her mother's face, unrepentant joy in her expression. Nikita took a mental snapshot of the moment, to be filed away in her most private memories. She'd never take an actual snapshot because if it existed, there existed the chance that someone could find it, use it against her by harming Sasha and Nadia. The lack of an actual photograph didn't matter. Nikita's mental acuity was extremely high. She'd remember, just like she remembered that Sasha had made the same sounds as a child. Sasha had also smelled much the same as Nadia did when Sasha held her out and Nikita took her into her arms. Perhaps all babies had that innocent scent. A bright, curious mind glanced across hers. Nikita nudged the child back without causing harm or distress, accompanying the psychic action with a non-vocal suggestion that Nadia protect her mind. She needs to stop reaching indiscriminately for others using telepathy, Nikita told Sasha. She's old enough. I haven't wanted to stifle her, Sasha replied. And she's around friendly minds. She's Sasha. A powerful one. Nikita repeated her nudge when her grandchild reached out again.
No, nadie.
A firm command that made the child go still, watchful. You must train her, Nikita told her frowning daughter. You've taught her to shield and you've got your own shield over hers, but I can still send telepathic thoughts to her through the link she initiated. I could tell her anything I wanted, send her nightmare images, teach her to fear you, anything. Sasha's face lost color, her eyes stark. There was a knock on the door a second later. Glancing over her shoulder, Sasha didn't speak, but Lucas Hunter didn't knock again or seek to enter the room. As Nikita had always suspected, the changeling mate bond functioned on a psychic level in some fashion. You're right. Sasha's voice trembled. I've been so focused on not crushing her or hurting her that I went too far in the opposite direction. It's like Lucas teaching her not to use her claws in play. Sasha snuggled her baby when Nadia made her way back to her. It's not hurting her to teach her psychic discipline. It's giving her the tools she needs to survive and thrive. Exactly. There, in that moment, Nikita shared the first moment of pure and absolute understanding with her daughter. Sasha, too, she thought, would do whatever was necessary to protect her child. Once, Lucas had thought he'd never voluntarily permit his mate and child to be alone in a room with Nikita Duncan. But here he was, holding up the wall outside Nikita's bedroom suite. Even when he'd sensed Sasha's sudden distress, he hadn't barged in. They'd been mated long enough that he could distinguish acute distress from a lesser emotional shock, and this had felt more akin to the latter. Sasha's silent response through their mate bond had eased his concern. Lucas would never change his mind about Nikita Duncan, not after the things the woman had done as a counselor, but as he'd told his empath, better a child who knew her powerful, and to a cat, intriguing grandmother, than that she be tempted to find out on her own. That didn't mean he wasn't having to fight the urge to break down the door and get his mate and child out of there. A call from Mercy to do with the joint pack event distracted him for a few minutes, but even then, the majority of his attention remained hyper-focused on the door behind which had disappeared 2 pieces of his heart. Sasha proved exactly how well she knew him when she exited. Immediately handing him Naya, she slipped her hand into his. His bristling protective instinct settled, his claws no longer in danger of breaking through his skin. They didn't speak until after Vasich had returned them home. Lucas thanked the teleporter, who simply nodded. Even after they were alone as a family, Lucas and Sasha waited until Naya was down for her nap before they opened up this particular box. Lucas put on some soft music, drew his mate into his arms. As they swayed to the lazy beat, she told him about the meeting with her mother. She meant it. Sasha's voice was raw. That she never saw me as flawed. Lucas knew others would never understand the import of Nikita's words, of how much they meant to Sasha. The hurt inside her that her mother had inflicted was no longer a scar, but neither could such pain be easily forgotten. You've never been flawed. It still pissed him off each time she used that word in relation to herself. I know. She ran her hand over his back as she lifted her face to smile up at him. I wouldn't dare argue with an alpha cat. He nipped at her lower lip. Smartass. Eyes dancing, she kissed him all slow and sexy. Only when they were both breathless did she break the kiss to continue speaking. Mother told me to start teaching Naya mental discipline. His hackles rose. Why do you sound like you're considering it? Right now, Sasha said. Naya's curious about everyone and anything, and I would never attempt to suppress that. But she's also dangerously open. Not only have I not taught her to be careful who she connects with telepathically, or to never connect to strange minds without my permission. As we've taught her not to go with strangers. Lucas's bunched-up muscles began to relax. Sasha nodded. I was so intent on not suffocating her in any way, in giving her the psychic freedom I never had, that I went too far in the other direction. I understand, kitten. Lucas had to constantly fight his own overprotective urges. If I could, I'd wrap you both in cotton wool, as well as every single vulnerable member of his pack. You help me deal with that. I'll help you deal with this. Lines of strain fading from her expression, Sasha said. Mother gave me a number of tips about how to teach Naya what she needs, but I thought I'd speak to Shea as well. A long pause, Sasha placing her head against his shoulder as they swayed to the music. Nikita kept me safe, but it hurt. Ashaya's doing the same for Keenan without damaging him. He's a psychically strong and disciplined child who's lost none of his personality or joy. Lucas dropped a kiss on her hair. There's also the fact that she's guiding and teaching him while he's living in a changeling pack. Nikita had never had to deal with a child who was surrounded by primal and unrestrained emotion on a daily basis, rather than by the icy discipline of sigh under silence. Yes, you're right. Several of Nikita's techniques would collapse under non-silent conditions. You should talk to the Laurens too. Walker Lauren in particular had been dealing with children outside the signet and outside silence for longer than anyone else Lucas knew. Judd's brother had also been a teacher in the signet. Sasha nodded before leaning back to look at him once more. Her arms hooked around his neck and her lips swollen from his kiss. We have to write a whole new rule book, don't we? Lucas's panther rumbled awake deep in his chest. That's what rebels do. And Sasha Duncan, cardinal empath, mate to an alpha, and mother to a side-changeling child, was the rebel who'd blown the signet wide open. Letters to Nina. From the private diaries of Father Xavier Perez. June 1, 2080.
Nina.
My first friend, the one I once tried to assassinate. His life changed drastically some time ago. He was ripped out of one world and had to learn to exist in another, and for a while I feared he wouldn't adapt. But he did, and here's how. This man I once saw as cold as ice now loves a woman as deeply and as passionately as I love you. I feel such joy for him, Nina. To see the look in his eyes, that is hope. The same God that took you away from me has given him this chance. He doesn't agree with me, of course. He isn't a man of faith. He believes in honor and in fidelity, and in standing behind your actions rather than putting faith in some otherworldly entity. The arguments and conversations we have, Nina, you would love it. He accepts me for who I am, and I do the same for him and our other friend, and all three of us we challenge one another. Your beautiful mind is all that's missing. Even after so much time has passed, I still hope for you. But then I realize that if you're alive, you've chosen not to come to me and my heart shatters. Say you're not angry with me, Nina. Please. I could not bear it if you had forsaken me.
Chevy.
Chapter 47. 10 in the evening in Venice, and Bowen Knight was tapping his finger on his desk as he read through the latest report from the implant team when he received a message on his phone. He didn't immediately recognize the sender. Not unusual, since everyone in the Human Alliance had access to his contact details. It sometimes made for a chaotic day, but most folks were good about only contacting him directly if it was a matter that needed to be brought to the attention of the Alliance's security chief. The message was simple: we need to talk. Too sensitive to send over unsecured line. Isaac. He did a quick search on the sender's number. It returned a listing for Beauclair Trucking based out of Vancouver, Canada. A little digging and he found the name of the owner. Isaac Beauclair. Beauclair and his company had joined the Alliance a year earlier. According to the records kept by Beau's administrative staff, no one from the company had ever attended an Alliance meeting, but they paid their dues like clockwork, and the owner had made 2 requests for Alliance assistance. In both cases it had been a simple application for a business introduction. Nothing unusual in that. Many Alliance members had joined for the same reason, to expand their network among other human companies. Of course, with the Alliance now part of Trinity, with far more streamlined access to Psi and Changeling businesses, that element of their membership base had increased again by a significant percentage. Beau also had access to certain security databases, and when he ran Isaac's name through those, he saw no red flags. The owner of the very successful company still drove a long-haul truck on occasion, and he had a clean record. No smuggling allegations, nothing but a higher-than-average number of speeding tickets. The latter was a badge of honor with truckers. They always tried to push their trucks, the temptation of often otherwise empty highways too much. Beauclair's company, however, was interesting. It had a reputation for security and reliability, and as a result, often carried high-value goods that couldn't be transported any other way. Teleporters didn't usually stoop to such pragmatic work, and even after all the technological advances to date, sometimes the best and most economically efficient way to move certain items from one place to the next was via the road. Instead of messaging back, Beau called Lily in from where she was catching up on her own work nearby. His sister did a little hacking at his request, found the direct link to the comm system on board Isaac's truck, and set up a secure call. According to Beauclair Trucking's records, Isaac was on the road today. Just tap this and you'll be set, Lily said, then left him to it. The call went through without any difficulty, was answered audio only on the other end. Who's this? Was the brusque question. Bowen Knight. You wanted to talk. Audio only turned into visual and audio, and Bowen found himself talking to a broad-shouldered man who looked remarkably like his official ID photo. Isaac Beauclair had white skin touched with enough sun that it was warm rather than cool, sandy red-brown hair cut fairly tidily but not ruthlessly, a neat beard that was more red than red-brown, and dark hazel eyes. From what Bo could see, the other man was wearing what looked like a band t-shirt in black, the print white. Didn't expect such a quick response, Isaac said. Give me a second to put the truck on full auto and AV. Bo waited while the other man did that, then Isaac came back on screen. We have a few minutes before I have to retake manual control. The roads are a little iffy in this section of my route. Couple of broken NAV beacons that haven't been fixed. The line is secure, Bo told him. I made certain of it. Figure you know your business. Isaac glanced over his shoulder, seemed to say something that wasn't picked up by the speakers. When he turned back, his face held a grim look. I might have done something that could blow back on the Alliance itself. Explain. I pulled into a truck stop couple of hours ago, went in to grab a coffee, used the restroom, usual stuff. Isaac shrugged. When I came back out, there was this SUV parked next to my truck. Blacked out windows, all-terrain tires. Anything unusual about that? Not really. I see those vehicles now and then. Mostly it's big CEOs or celebrities who want to travel incognito. They don't usually pull in at truck stops, but I figured maybe someone started jonesing for coffee or needed the restroom. But I still took a close look because of that alert about the other SUV that went out earlier. He paused and Bo had the sense he was ordering his thoughts. Isaac Beauclair struck him as a very deliberate kind of man. So I jump up into the cab of my truck, and as I'm pulling the door shut, I glance down. His face turned grim. SUV was all blacked out, but it had a glass sunroof that wasn't, and I could see right through it. I saw a man in the front passenger seat and a woman in back. She was covered with a blanket, but her face was all scarred up and bruised and she looked fucking thin. Bo could guess where this was going. You intervened? First I went and grabbed a couple of buddies who just brought in their trucks. Was a slight risk the driver of the SUV would return first and take off, but the dude in the car, he gave off a psi vibe. I knew I needed backup. Bo nodded. Humans were very good at identifying psi. They had to be. It was a survival mechanism. Some family lines had developed an eerily accurate second sense about psi in the vicinity, though they were all quick to state that it wasn't itself a psychic skill. Bo had never quite bought the latter. After all, psi, changeling, and human came from the same original stock. An evolution, it never stopped. Your buddies all human? No, the trucker replied. One of them was changeling. I figured he'd stay standing even if the psi took me out. Isaac turned and spoke over his shoulder again, and once more, his voice was too quiet for the microphone to catch. I went up to the front passenger side window, knocked. He continued after turning back to the comm guy, rolled it down, asked if he could help me. I asked what the hell was going on with the woman in back, and he said they were taking her to a hospital after finding her on the side of the road. Sounded plausible, but that was when she woke up and said, "Help me." Isaac shrugged. That was enough for us. I smashed in the back window to unlock the door while my changeling friend hauled the psi half out of the window to hold his attention. Our other friend kept a lookout. I just got the woman out when a second psi came running out, hit me with a telepathic blow. The truck driver rubbed his temple. It was hard as hell but not debilitating. I don't figure he was that strong, but he was strong enough to weaken us, and that gave him a chance to help the other psi fight off my changeling friend. I think they would have come for the woman, but I pulled a gun. Another shrug. Got to have protection on these isolated routes, especially when I'm moving expensive high-tech equipment. So they hauled ass instead. One of my buddies got a partial plate. I'll send it through. Bowen nodded. The woman, you didn't take her to a hospital? He'd figured out she had to be behind Isaac in the cab of the truck. Shaking his head, Isaac lowered his voice. She was freaked out, begged for me to get her to the sea. He blew out a breath. Her eyes. I never saw eyes like that. Like the blackest part of the ocean, no light, no shadow. Bo felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. He thought of Black C's request to track another black SUV, considered the plea made by Isaac's passenger, and he wondered, can you describe her to me? 5'4", black hair, light brown skin. Heritage from the Pacific Islands maybe. She won't give me her name. He paused. It looks like someone took a fucking hunting knife to her face. Bo's hand clenched on the phone. How long before you reach the ocean? Isaac didn't seem like the kind of man who'd make the woman wait. 6 hours, the trucker replied. I was pretty inland when I found her. That gave Bo plenty of time to get in touch with Black C. I think I know who she belongs to. Give me a little time to see if I can confirm. Hanging up to Isaac's curt nod, he pulled up the contact information of the man who tipped off the Alliance about that little cell of anti-human fanatics. Malachi Reese. Beside the man's name was a title. Black Sea Security Chief. Bo didn't expect his call to be immediately answered. The water changelings had a reputation for preferring their privacy, and making it difficult for anyone to get hold of them. And right now they were understandably pissed off at the alliance. However, Malachi picked up within the first 2 seconds. Yes. This is Bo Knight. Hold while I confirm. Raising an eyebrow, Bowen leaned back in his chair. When Malachi came back on the line, he said, "How exactly do you confirm?" "We have methods," the Black Sea male responded. "You didn't call to chat."
No.
"One of my people has picked up a woman in bad physical shape, who wants to go to the sea." "Name?" "She won't give it, but I have a description." He repeated it to Malachi. "She sound like one of yours?" A pause, as if the Black Sea security chief was considering whether to confirm or deny. "Yes," he said at last. "We can take charge of her if you give us a location. Unless you call in a teleporter, you won't get her to the sea any faster than she's already going," Bo told the other man. "She's in a long-haul truck safe and warm. You know how fast those truckers go. And there was nothing else on the road that could take down a truck that big. We need to know where she is nevertheless," Malachi said. It was Bowen's turn to pause. If he gave them Isaac's details, then he made the other man vulnerable. On the other hand, Black Sea had extended the hand of friendship, while the alliance had let them down in return. Maybe it was time to even the scoreboard. He sent the data. "You should have someone meet her at the beach. From the way she was described to me, I'm not sure she has the strength to take on the ocean. We'll organize that." Malachi's tone shifted slightly. "Pass on a message. Tell her to resist the temptation to shift. In her condition, the water near Canada is too cold for her. Say her pack is on the way and promises to get her to warmer waters as fast as possible. Consider it done." Hanging up, Bowen passed on the message and alerted Isaac that he might end up with some company along the way. "Should be friendly, but if they give you problems, let me know. I'll call in a few favors, get you help." "I'll make sure she stays safe," Isaac said before switching off. Bo got another message an hour later. "I've got an escort front and back." Isaac had also sent through the vehicle ID numbers. When Bowen checked with Malachi, the Black Sea male confirmed they were Black Sea vehicles. "They won't get in the trucker's way, but they need to be there for our packmate when she reaches the beach." Layla Savia didn't know why she trusted the man who'd rescued her. Maybe because he'd rescued her, or maybe it was because she'd seen the photograph tacked to his dashboard. It was of him laughing with a tall blonde woman who stood in his arms with no hint of fear on her face, though the man who'd introduced himself as Isaac was at least as big and as muscled as Malachi. Whatever it was, she'd given in to her need to be clean of the ugliness of what had been done to her by showering far too long in the shower inside the living quarters of his cab. She'd probably emptied his water tank, but he hadn't knocked on the door to tell her to get out. Instead, when she finally came out, it was to see he'd left a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt for her to change into. His clothes would have fallen off her, but these kind of fit after she tucked the t-shirt into the sweatpants in a very unglamorous move and tightened the drawstring, then rolled up the bottoms of the pants. Clearly, the clothes belonged to a taller, healthier woman. The laughing blonde? The idea made Layla happy, though both Isaac and the woman were strangers to her, and she needed to think thoughts of happiness right now. It was all that was keeping her from shattering, her psyche held together by a single fragile thread. When she came to peek out at Isaac, he glanced back at her with a cheek-creasing smile. "You know," he said before turning his attention back to the road, "you're not the first girl I've rescued." The part of Layla that had kept her sane in the darkness scowled. "I'm a woman, not a girl." Jesse was mouthy too, so much emotion in his voice as he touched his fingers to the photograph. "She drives big rigs now. Drives me crazy too. I'm a scientist," Layla found herself telling him, and in so doing reclaimed a part of her lost self. "I study the creatures that call the ocean home." Isaac whistled. "Smart." His tone changed on the next words became rough. "Those assholes hurt you pretty bad." He nodded up ahead. "You need medical help from your people?" She could see the gleaming white all-terrain vehicle through the windscreen, the landscape beyond painted by cloudy late afternoon light. "Are you sure those people are mine?" Some guy called Malachi confirmed it. Her eyes threatened to fill with tears. Malachi wouldn't let anyone hurt her. He was Miena's and Miena protected her people, no matter how distant they were or how small their relative importance to the rest of the world. Each and every member of Black Sea was important to Miena. Crawling up to sit in the passenger seat, she forced herself to say, "I could ride with them. They're going really fast." Only she didn't know them and Isaac was safe. Isaac had a beard like her father and he loved a woman with blonde hair and freckles scattered over her nose and across the tops of her cheeks. "I could do with seeing the ocean," Isaac replied with a grin that reassured her he didn't mind this detour. "Been a while." My name is Layla. It seemed right to tell this good man who was taking her home. Pretty. Picking up something from the cup holder, he held it out. You should eat a little more if you can. Taking what proved to be a protein bar, she peeled it open with fingers that were swollen from how the driver of the SUV had wrenched her fingers back when she tried to run at a stop. He'd also punched her in the face. You have someone who'll look after you? Isaac asked in that rough tone that was oddly comforting, like Malachi when he got gruff. Once you reach home? The thought of home made her chest ache. I swim alone, she told him after swallowing a bite of the protein bar. But I'll go to the city for a while, rest in my family's arms. You ever get lonely? He grabbed an unopened water bottle from his side and handed it to her. Swimming alone, I mean? Ocean's a big place. Laughter spilled out of her, unexpected and rusty. Don't truckers drive alone for days at times? Point to you. He chuckled and the sound was a warm blanket wrapping around her. But I don't run alone much anymore. A glance at the photograph that said more than words. The rare times I do, I still see people, at the truck stops for one. At the sleep stops if we end up parking side by side to catch some shut-eye. No truck stops in the ocean. I have friends who swim by. She smiled at the memories of how her best friends would haul themselves up onto her boat and raid her galley shelves for cookies. One time, after the fiends had eaten her out of cookies until not a crumb remained, she'd come up from a swim to discover 2 large sacks of cookies left on deck, the supplies carried to her in waterproof bags. The gaps are longer than in your line of work, she told Isaac as her mouth watered for a taste of those chocolate chip raisin cookies. Weeks rather than days, but we're social in our own way. Her smile faded under a sudden nausea. Her skin chilled. I don't know if I'll be able to swim in my waters anymore. The kidnappers might take me again. Isaac shot her a dark look that didn't terrify. She already knew him well enough to understand his anger was directed at the people who tortured and imprisoned her. You could swim with a group for a while, he suggested. Fight your need for solitude to stay in your home waters. Layla thought of how she'd fought so much already, of how she'd survived unbroken and felt a flicker of pride, an emotion she'd long thought dead inside her. It might be nice to swim with my friends, she admitted, knowing those friends would welcome her despite their own normally solitary travels. Her skin ached, hungry for the cool slide of water. At home the water was so clear she could see beams of sunlight spearing through to scatter sparkles of light like a silent fireworks display. But right now, so far from home, the memory hurt, so she turned to something that didn't. Will you tell me about your Jessie? Isaac grinned and then he told her all about the tough, smart girl he'd picked up on a lonely road late one night, who he'd then chewed out for hitchhiking. That girl had grown up, grown even tougher and smarter, and become one of Isaac's best drivers. She'd also turned into a tall, gorgeous woman who seemed to find pleasure in driving Isaac to distraction. Until one day she stopped calling, stopped forwarding him funny emails, stopped being an integral and daily part of his life. Layla's heart squeezed. No, she whispered. I don't want a sad ending. Couldn't deal with it. Not today. Maybe not for many days to come. Isaac winked at her. Jessie just got sick and tired of my thick head and decided to say to hell with me. His expression devolved into a dark scowl. She started dating that pretty boy trooper Michel Benoit. Growling words that could have come from one of the big bull sea lion changelings. I mean, really? A trooper? Layla's shoulders shook. How did you win her back? She knew he had just noticed the golden wedding band on his left ring finger. It was visible in the photograph too, as was the glint of gold on Jessie's hand. Shaking his head, the bearded trucker said, That is one hell of a tale. He began to tell it, snarling every time he got to a part that involved his apparent mortal enemy Michel Benoit. She was so caught up in his story that she didn't know when she fell asleep, but when she came awake, it was to a moonlit darkness and the salt-laced scent of the ocean. Eyes burning and heart thumping, she began to push at the heavy door. Isaac had already unlocked it, and by the time she pushed it open, he was there to catch her. Isaac! Tears rolled hot and wet down her face. You brought me home. He refused to release his grip on her. I did, sweetheart, but you know what Malachi said. You won't survive a swim in your current condition. Layla barely heard him. The music of the crashing waves, a visceral pulse that pounded her name. Then a tall brunette with features that reminded Layla of another marine biologist she knew. A woman who hailed from the Lilwet Nation, exited one of the escort vehicles and came over. She carried the scent of the ocean too deep in her skin. Pack. The realization was enough to pull Layla's attention from the sea, but not to separate her from Isaac. She didn't know this packmate had never before seen her. Then the woman made a call, gave her the phone. Her entire body shook because it was Miena on the other end, telling her she was safe, that this woman and her partner would bring her to her own waters. Canadian waters are too cold for you in your current condition, Miena said with command inherent in her every word. It'll stop your heart even if you shift. Stay in human form a little longer. Layla's entire self hurt with need for the sea, but she couldn't gainsay the first among them. I won't shift. Came out a trembling promise. Only a short while longer, little dancer. Little dancer. No one had called her by the childhood nickname for an Ian. Of course Miena would remember, and in so doing remind Layla of who she was under the scars and the pain. I'll hold on, she promised in a stronger voice. Until I'm home. Taking the phone after Layla handed it back, the brunette pointed out a yacht moored in the distance, its sails glowing white under the silver kiss of the moon, then gestured toward a small jet boat in the shallows. If you're ready? Layla swallowed, looked up at Isaac. Thank you. Your Jessie is a lucky woman. His smile was sunrise over an ocean. Send me a postcard with palm trees on it someday. I've never made it to the tropics. Throwing her arms around his big sturdy form, she whispered, come visit me. Bring Jessie. And then she couldn't fight the pull anymore. Was heading down the beach so fast that her knees threatened to crumple out from under her. The brunette woman and a slender black man helped her onto the jet boat. She trailed her hand in the water and tried not to sob with need as they began to pull away. Home, she was going home. Letters to Nina. From the Private Diaries of Father Xavier Perez. July 14, 2081.
Nina.
War has broken out. The streets of San Francisco crawl with soldiers. I'm writing this in the cellar of the church in a stolen moment. Around me are refugees I and other able-bodied people have brought in. There is no more time to write. I must go, must see if there are others I can help.
Xavier.
Chapter 48. Miena didn't take a real breath until Layla stepped onto Pacifica, the city rocking gently under them in a rhythm that was the sea's pulse. The young woman had been ferried by yacht to the nearest large Black Sea city, then put on a high-speed plane home. That plane had landed 2 minutes ago on the water beside Black Sea's main city in the tropics. Layla. She took her packmate into her arms, held her while Layla cried. They made me ugly, Layla whispered against her chest. I was never pretty, but now I'm a monster. Never say that again. Miena fought her fury, squeezed Layla tight. You are strong and beautiful and one of mine. Layla's voice was thick when she answered, her fingers rising to her face. The scars, Miena. I want them gone. We have an excellent surgeon. He was human but an angel with scars. I'll get him to come out to the city. That Layla had spoken first of her scars didn't surprise Miena. All victims of trauma reacted differently, and she knew from Olivia Coletti that sometimes, a superficial statement or request wasn't superficial at all. Each time I look in the mirror, Olivia had whispered to her, I see them. This is in my face. It's what they made me. Will it work? Layla asked shakily. Yes. Olivia's scars were already so fine that it was difficult to spot them under normal light. He's very good. A jerky nod. I'm not vain. It's just. I know. She kissed the shorter, slighter woman's temple, kept her warm and safe within her embrace. We've missed you, Layla. Sobs broke out of Layla's body anew, heartrending and painful and raw. But when it was over and Layla lifted tear-drenched eyes to Miena's, those eyes held a luminous light. The world doesn't understand. They think because some of us swim alone and because the ocean is so vast that we don't care. Miena wiped away Layla's tears. We know the truth and that's what matters. Miena would turn predator for her people, would fight any enemy to keep them safe. We are Black Sea. We are one, Layla whispered, completing the motto that was written nowhere and yet that defined water-based changelings. No matter how far they traveled or how deep, they were part of a bigger whole. Never forgotten. Never discarded. 1. Part 7. Chapter 49. 10 minutes after receiving word that Layla Savia was home safe with her people, Riley walked with Mercy in the woods near their cabin, her arm hooked into his. He refused to let go of her. His tall, lithely muscled mate looked as if she'd topple over. Why didn't you put on weight anywhere else? He growled at her. At least you'd be more stable. She bared her teeth at him. Shut up. I can keep myself upright. And for your information, I ate like a bear before hibernation, but our children are voracious hooligans. Riley waited when she stopped, caught her breath. Wait, at no point in her pregnancy had Mercy ever had to catch her breath during a simple walk. You're having a contraction, he accused. First one. A scowl directed at him. Only tiny anyway. Probably be a few hours yet at least. Of course it will. Knowing that any children with Mercy's blood in their veins would be in no way predictable, He pulled out his phone and put in the call to Tamsin. "I'll be there in 15, the healer said, clearly already in the vicinity. That was likely on purpose, with Mercy overdue. Not just in terms of a multiple changeling pregnancy but generally. Oh crap! Mercy almost bent over. Heart-thudding, Riley nonetheless kept his cool and began to stroke her back with the firm touch she liked. When she was ready, he helped her back up. They walked some more but stayed near the cabin. Riley's instinct was to hustle her into a comfortable bed, but Mercy was a leopard sentinel and she knew her body. At one point, she pressed her hands palms down against a tree and pushed out while he massaged her back, digging in his thumbs the way she demanded. Even when she snarled at him, her eyes dark as a result of the increasing pain, he kissed her temple and petted her, and after the contraction passed, his wild, beautiful mate turned into him. "I'm sorry." Riley kissed her cheeks, her lips in a caress that was all about comfort. "You can yell at me all you want. It makes me feel like I'm useful for something." Brushing back her damp hair, he held her as long as she wanted before they began to walk again. Mercy's water broke a minute later. The contractions were coming so close together by the time Tamsin reached them that the gaps were measured in seconds rather than minutes. They didn't make it inside. The pup cubs were born in a rush on the soft grass outside the cabin, Mercy's hand gripping Riley's and her back braced against his as Tamsin caught their impatient children, who all decided to come out pretty much on top of one another. Wiping off their faces, the healer placed the children in Mercy's trembling arms. Riley slid his own under hers to help her hold them safe. "Hello," Mercy whispered, a softness to her that, until this instant, only Riley had ever seen. She kissed each squalling face in turn before looking up at him. "You're a daddy now, Wolf." His smile felt as if it would crack his face. "Hell yeah. Come around," she murmured as the pup cubs quieted under their mother's touch, at the skin-to-skin contact that was so important to newborn changelings. They need to feel their daddy's touch, too. Easing away his bracing hold, he came around to the side so he could support Mercy with one leg behind her back and still be able to hold their babies. He undid his shirt almost without thought, and then Mercy was putting all three pup cubs in his arms. The voracious hooligans were strong and healthy but tiny. He nuzzled each soft face, drew in their scents, felt his heart expand again to make even more room for these three precious souls. Tamsin, who'd been taking care of Mercy, finally nudged them up and into the house. Only when all three pup cubs were snuggled up against Riley in the bed, skin to skin, did Mercy step into the shower for a minute. Dressed in one of his t-shirts afterward, panties on underneath, she made a beeline for their babies. "Look at them. They're so perfect." She took a tiny foot, kissed each toe, then did the same for the other two pup cubs as Tamsin smiled and left them in privacy. When Mercy took a pup cub and the baby whimpered at the touch of cotton, she tugged off the tee and snuggled their child to her heartbeat. The baby quieted at once. "Riley, we made 3 gorgeous babies," she whispered in open awe, her eyes shining. With her hair cascading in red waves over skin of cream and gold, and her face luminous as she looked first at one babe, then leaned over to kiss the loosely fisted hand of another, the head of the third. Mercy made his heart stop. "We did," he managed to say, juggling the 2 pup cubs he held over onto one arm so he could close his free hand over Mercy's nape. "You're amazing." A sparkling smile. "Never forget it, Wolf." Leaning in, she nipped at his lower lip. "I want to hold them all again." She situated herself in a slightly leaning position against the headboard, pillows piled up behind her. Then Riley placed the other 2 pup cubs against her. Their tiny faces seemed to smile, their soft hands spreading on her skin. Riley watched over them, feeling a joy so deep that neither part of him could articulate it. His mate was safe, as were their pup cubs. Riley Aiden Kincaid could ask for nothing more. Letters to Nina. From the Private Diaries of Father Xavier Perez. September 27, 2081. Nina. Our city has been at peace for months. The changelings won the battle that shattered that peace earlier this year, but both my friends believe this is only a temporary lull. Change is building with ever-increasing momentum in the Psi-net, the network that connects every Psi in the world but for the rare few who have defected. "An earthquake is coming, Xavier," one of my friends said to me just hours earlier. "Only the strong will be left standing when it's over." I pray for the souls caught up in the turmoil, Psi, human and changeling alike. I'm no longer full of hate toward an entire race. They are as good and bad, as perfect and flawed as any one of us. In understanding that, I found a kind of peace too. But my heart, it still hurts in the night from missing you. It's been so many years now and still I turn and look for your smile. Still I reach for your hand. I know I always will. Your Xavier. Chapter 50. Lucas and Sasha arrived to welcome the pup cubs at the same time as Hawk and Sienna, A bare hour after the birth. Given the fact that Riley's alpha and his mate should have been far distant, Riley knew Hawk had made certain he was nearby this past week, as they waited for Mercy to give birth. Not just so he could greet the babies, but in case an alpha's strength was needed. Though Lucas was the one who had a direct link to Mercy, Hawk could share his strength through Riley. Both alphas stopped in the doorway to the bedroom, their shoulders touching. It was an unusual stance for two such dominant predatory changelings. Not only were they sharing space, they weren't pushing forward to assert who was more alpha. It revealed far more about their relationship, and the friendship and trust that tied them together, than either would ever admit. So, Hawk said, I see nobody won the betting pool. Lucas's smile was very feline. Don't the rules say all the money then goes to your pup cubs? Beside Riley, his shirt-clad mate smirked. That shirt was his and it was unbuttoned enough that she could maintain skin-to-skin contact with the pup cubs while not showing her breasts, though as she'd pointed out, her breasts were freaking amazing right now. Riley had zero arguments with that declaration. She was sitting cross-legged under a sheet pulled up to her waist, two of their babies cuddled up against her, while Riley held the third one against his bare chest as he sprawled with his back to the headboard. Tamsin had draped soft fleece throws over the pup cubs' backs, to help keep them warm. Mercy said, yes and yes, in response to Hawk's and Lucas's statements. Then she reached out and bumped Riley's raised fist with her own. Here's to a plan well executed. Riley chuckled when Hawk shook his head and said, led astray by a cat. It was my idea. Riley dropped a kiss on the head of the baby in his arms. He and Mercy had been playing past the pup cubs the entire hour since the birth, ensuring each child received equal time with both parents. Not that the sleepy hooligans seemed to care, curling up happily against either father or mother. Lara helped, he added. The snowdancer healer had accidentally left up a doctored scan on her view screen for a short period. A packmate had seen the 4 distinct outlines in the image and rumors being what they were. Suddenly all the betting had skewed toward quadruplets. Tammy too. Mercy nuzzled the pup cubs in her arms, then reached over to touch her fingers to the back of the baby Riley held. She confirmed the rumor by refusing to confirm it while making it obvious it was true. Both alphas grinned, then flowed into the room. Riley didn't know how they did it, but somehow they got in at the same time without jostling or pushing. As if they'd coordinated it subconsciously. And yeah, he'd keep that thought to himself. Luke and Hawk might be friends, but they hated it if anyone pointed that out. Lucas sat on the bed on Mercy's side, while Hawk stood beside Riley. No words needed to be spoken. He and Mercy handed over their precious burdens to their alphas, to be accepted as pack, to be welcomed. All 3 babies remained calm and quiescent, as was normal for a young child in the presence of their alpha. The interesting thing was that they stayed calm for both alphas. Hawk and Lucas didn't hand back the children until both had handled each child. That was when Sienna and Sasha peeked in and asked if they could cuddle the pup cubs. Both women tumbled onto the end of the bed when Mercy waved them in and there was smiling and cooing and snuggling. Mercy meanwhile just looked smug and happy. Which made Riley very smug and happy. Arm around her he glanced from Hawk to Lucas, then back to his own alpha. So, their babies wouldn't shift for approximately a year, but the alphas would know which pup cub belonged to which pack. A good alpha, and both these men were extraordinary alphas, knew his pack. Lucas's eyes met Hawk's. Panther green and wolf blue, both sets glinted. Lucas was the one who spoke. We figured we'd keep you in suspense like you've kept everyone else the entire pregnancy. Mercy threw a pillow at her laughing alpha's head. I'll kill you, I swear to God. A pause before she released her claws and looked consideringly at Hawk. I'd kill you first though. Never doubted it. With that, Hawk reached out and plucked the 2 boys out of Sasha's arms, while Lucas took their little girl from Sienna. Sasha's eyes widened. 2 wolf pups to 1 leopard cub. I guess this answers the question of which one of you is more dominant. No it doesn't, Riley said. Isabella was born first, led the charge. Riley nuzzled a kiss to Mercy's hair. I'd say we came out even. Good answer, Wolf. A kiss that held sunshine, his mate's delight open. I thought so, he murmured. I bet Isabella runs the boys ragged. I love that name. Sasha smiled down at the pup cub she'd stolen from Lucas. Is she named after your grandmother? Mercy nodded. I figure an alpha is a good namesake for our girl. Her middle name is Maeve after Riley's mom. She twined her fingers with Riley's. Acton is for Riley's father and Michael for mine. Her smile grew deeper. Belle, Ace, and Micah. Grinning, she added. We decided we'd better come up with nicknames before my brothers did it first. God knows what Shadow, Herb, and Frenchie would have chosen. As everyone laughed, she kissed Ace's cheek after Hawk returned their youngest son to her arms and Micah to Riley's. Riley and Mercy had chosen the family names because they wanted their children to feel firmly rooted despite the fact that all three were unique and would be forging their own path. It was for the same reason that they'd had a long discussion before settling on Smith Kincaid as the pup cub surname. A bit of a mouthful, yes, especially since all three had middle names, but it meant their babies, regardless of their changeling animal, would never wonder if they belonged more to one parent than to the other. Michael's middle name is Hawk, Riley told his best friend. Hawk froze, then said, "Hell." The single word held a storm of emotion, his wolf prowling in his eyes. "And Acton's is Lucas," Mercy told her alpha, to the same intense reaction. "Wolf or leopard, we wanted our babies to know they are cherished by both packs." That, Riley thought, was the purest truth. 10 minutes later, Riley saw Mercy's eyes follow Hawk as he handed Ace over to Lucas, before taking Belle and Micah from the leopard alpha. He knew why she was so intrigued. Both alphas were treating the children as their own. That wasn't usually a choice. Alphas were as territorial about children in their pack as parents were about their pups or cubs. Lucas caught their glances. "In terms of pack hierarchy and for any disciplinary needs, Belle is mine, while Micah and Ace are Hawk's, but they're all ours." It was an extraordinary thing for a predatory changeling alpha to say. Yet it resonated with Riley. He was Hawk's, but he'd fight to the death for Lucas too, because DarkRiver needed Lucas, and Mercy needed DarkRiver. He knew his mate would do the same for Hawk, no matter how often she might threaten to kill him. Now she stole back Belle, nuzzled her sweet face. "You hear that, kiddo? You're going to have to deal with two of them. She can handle it." Lucas touched Mercy's cheek with the affection of alpha to packmate. "Belle's your kid, with a bit of wolf thrown in, but we won't hold that against her." Hawk growled at the other alpha, but it was hard to take his threat seriously when he was cradling Ace against his chest, his hands covering the pup cub's tiny body as he rubbed his jaw gently against Ace's face. Ace's hand opened, then fisted against Hawk's chest, though his eyes stayed closed. At the other end of the bed, Micah was yawning in Sasha's arms while Sienna gently brushed the dark auburn hair on his head. All the children had that dark shade that would probably become a deep brown with auburn highlights as they grew. A blend of their parents. It made Riley smile just as he caught the first hint of animated voices arrowing in their direction. His and Mercy's siblings, as well as Mercy's parents, tumbled inside minutes later, all joy and excitement and love. So much love. Their children would never lack for either playmates or care. And when they came home, they'd do so to parents who adored one another and their babies. Mercy looked up right then, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "I love you, Riley." "Ditto, kitty cat," he whispered, stealing a kiss while their babies held court. And for the first time in known history, wolf and leopard adults mingled with newborns in their arms. No protective aggression in either party. Family, Riley thought. Snowdancer and DarkRiver had been becoming family for a long time. Belle, Micah, and Ace had added the final seal on that bond. Bastien bared his teeth at his brother Sage. When Sage dared try to take Micah from him after Bastien had just claimed his nephew from Drew, Sage pushed in anyway, putting a friendly arm around the waist of Bastien's mate, Kirby, as he pressed up against her back and peered over her head at the baby in Bastien's arms. "Hey, Peanut," he said, touching a finger to the sleeping baby's nose. That nose wrinkled up, but the baby slept on. "Bastien, I want to hold him." Kirby held out her arms on that whisper, and he put Micah into her gentle embrace. Face lighting up, she cuddled the baby close. "Hey you." A gentle kiss to one velvet soft cheek. And the baby made a tiny sound that could have been a happy growl. "Did you hear that?" Bright lynx eyes. Kirby's cat is curious about this new packmate as the human side of her. "He likes me." "Of course he likes you. He knows family." Bastien's heart was a huge thing inside his chest. "Look after them both," he ordered his brother before going to find Mercy. His sister was still sitting in bed, more because so many people were piled on it talking and laughing, than because she looked in any way weak. Bulling his way through the crowd, he scooped her up in his arms to her laughing admonitions and smacked a kiss to her cheek. "You did good, Carrot." "Gore." Claws dug into his shoulders, but she kissed him back. "It hurt like a bitch." A thoughtful pause. "I think men should have to give birth too." Bastien winced.
Yeah, no?
Kissing her again, he put her back on the bed before her mate decided he was manhandling her too roughly and came after him. Bastien was confident of his own skills, but he wasn't about to go up against a new dad who happened to be a snowdancer lieutenant known as the Wall for his hard-headed stubbornness and refusal to surrender. He caught Lucas's eye as he was weaving his way out of the room, shook his head. He hadn't yet zeroed in on the individual who'd paid the captain of the ship meant to be Naya's prison. But he was close, so close he could almost smell it, almost reach out and grab that person by the throat, claws extended to do bloody damage. Lucas nodded, the Alpha's expression stating he had trust in Bastian's abilities. Leopard patting inside his skin, Bastian returned to Kirby to find Sage cradling the baby under Kirby's own hold. It meant his brother was pretty much cuddling Bastian's very cuddleable mate. Bastian shook his head. You can't steal either one of them, Herb. Sage managed to give him the finger while continuing to smile at the baby. Kirby, meanwhile, turned very carefully in Sage's hold and handed the baby to him. Support his head, she instructed, as Bastian's brother took Micah with utmost care. Hey kid. Sage's grin split his face. I'm your uncle, Sage. Your favorite uncle. As Sage wandered off to Gray, who just claimed Belle from her Aunt Brenna, Bastian wrapped his arms around Kirby from behind. Cute, huh? Gorgeous, Kirby agreed. I want one. Bastian chuckled. Let's get you used to shifting first. Kirby was still settling into her skin as a lynx. She was also spending time with the family she'd never had a chance to know as a child, and she was becoming an integral part of his. The latter wasn't much of a choice. The Smiths and DarkRiver had embraced her as one of their own. Kirby fit like a missing piece. The cubs especially loved playing with Kirby. She was an adult, but her lynx form made her smaller than adult leopards, and so to the cubs she seemed a perfect-sized playmate. The fact that she happened to be a kindergarten teacher, and had the patience to both play with and handle spirited cubs made her even more of a favorite. Now she laughed. You might possibly be right, plus I think we'll be babysitting the pup cubs often. Hopefully after they're a little bigger. I'm kind of freaked out by their teeniness, he admitted in a subvocal whisper. So fragile. Kirby patted one of his hands. You'll be fine. You have the gentlest hands. Lifting one of those hands, she pressed a row of kisses to his fingertips. And there went his heart going boom all over again. Letters to Nina. From the Private Diaries of Father Xavier Perez. June 23, 2082.
Nina.
I am in the mountains near. Xavier lifted his hand from the page and stared out over the mountains of his homeland. The sounds of children's voices rose up from the village below, where the little ones learned under a woven canopy held up by 6 poles pushed into the earth. The weave was treated to be waterproof, and on the ground was a thick rug on which about half the children sat and recited their mathematical tables. At the back were the older children. Instead of facing the teacher, they sat in small groups, their heads bent together as they worked on a project. This far into the mountains there were no separate classrooms. The children all had large-size organizers developed especially for such usage, plus access to a remote teacher for different subjects. However, as well as eating lunch together, they gathered together for an hour at the start of the day, and an hour at the end to learn communally, and to discuss their learning across age groups. It wasn't only humans who sat under the canopy. Several changeling children attended lessons in this village, since their pack had too few children to justify a separate classroom. It gave Xavier's heart solace to see their happy faces, their bright smiles, their innocent friendships. But his own smile was long lost, for he'd finally reached his destination, only to discover that Nina wasn't here. Judd and Caleb hadn't been wrong. A woman who could well be his Nina had been in this village less than a month earlier. She'd been standing in for the village medic who'd gone away for training, had moved on to her next post once the medic returned. He swallowed, looked down at the letter he was writing, started again. In my fantasies I used to imagine that perhaps you'd lost your memories and that was why you hadn't searched for me, but if this is you, then you remember your training, you remember being a nurse. You've chosen to stay here, far from me. You've chosen to change your name so I won't find you. My heart breaks at the thought of it, but I won't turn back now. I must know if it's you and if there is any hope of begging your forgiveness. The villagers tell me you don't have a lover that they know of. They are loyal to you. But an elder here recognized me as the man of God who had helped a friend in another village once. She was willing to trust me. I must believe her. For the idea that you now belong to another. Xavier's hand shook. Leaning his head back against the tree trunk, he blinked away the heat in his eyes, then put away the notebook and his pen. It took but a moment to pull on his backpack. Seconds later he was heading away from this village, and toward where the elder had told him the woman named Ani had gone. 2 days of trekking through the mountains and Xavier was a bare 15 minutes from his new destination. Instead of carrying on, he forced himself to stop by a small waterfall. If this was to be his last meeting with Nina, he'd show her his best self. Stripping, he took out the biodegradable soap in his pack, thanks to a small care package that had been gifted to him by Judd's mate, and washed himself. Drying off afterward, he pulled on underwear and a pair of khaki-colored cargo pants before using his phone camera as a mirror while he scraped off the ink-black beard that had grown in during his journey. Nina had always liked him clean-shaven, though she didn't mind stubble, especially when they kissed. Gripping the memory of her touch, her kiss in a tight fist, he finished shaving, then splashed on aftershave from the same care pack. His hair, tightly curled as it was, needed no brushing. Reaching to the bottom of his pack, he pulled out a pristine white t-shirt, shrugged into it. The color was stark against the teak shade of his skin, the fabric a little stiff because it was so new. Beneath it lay a necklace he'd worn for years. Socks and boots on, and he was as ready as he'd ever be. His pack felt heavier this time, but perhaps that was his heart weighing him down. No matter. He had to go forward, had to know. Stepping back onto the path, he made his way to the village. Children saw him first, they always did. Pelting away at light speed on bare feet, they called out to their parents and other elders in a language that wasn't identical to his native tongue, but that was close enough for him to understand. Making his way to the edge of the village, he waited with screaming patience until an elder, his brown-skinned face gnarled with life, came to him, asked him his business. "I've come to see Annie," he said. The elder's wary welcome turned into a scowl. "Who are you to look for our Annie?" "I've been searching for my Nina for many years," he said softly. "Since the day the Psy destroyed our village. My friends tell me Annie is Nina." A snort. "If she is? She's changed her name. Seems to me she wants to escape you." A dagger to the heart, those words made him stagger within. "Yes," he accepted even as he bled. "But I need to hear that from her." He met the elder's dark eyes. "You have no need to fear me. All I want is a moment with her." Then he heard it. Nina's laughter. Head jerking up, he dropped his pack and walked past the elder without looking back. He was conscious of further scowls and grumbling around him, conscious of people following, but he didn't care. He had to see her, had to beg her forgiveness. Then there she was, dressed in a simple dress of pale yellow that swirled around her calves as she spun and spun with her hands locked to those of a child of about 7 or 8. Other children danced around them, laughing and calling out for their turn. "Annie! Annie! Me! I want to have a go." His heart, it was a massive drum whose beat thundered in his ears. He would have gone to his knees except that he wanted to see Nina's eyes. And then the spin stopped and she turned laughingly toward him, and there was no recognition in her eyes. She looked straight through him. Xavier's breath turned into jagged shards in his lungs before his mind caught up with his heart. Regardless of how angry she was with him, Nina would never be able to coldly ignore him. They'd been too much to each other for such distance. Yet though her face was turned toward him, she didn't meet his eyes. Then he knew. Walking toward her, he watched her head angle a little to the left, her awareness of his approach clear. "It's Xavier," he said when he was only a foot away from her. Her lips parted in a whisper. "Xavier." A hand rose, trembling. He bent so she could touch her fingers to his face, so she could trace the lines of him. His beautiful Nina with her dark eyes that were so much paler now, the hue watery blue. The color of someone undergoing regeneration after catastrophic damage to the eyes. It took up to a year for the regeneration to work, and if Nina had been hurt during her jump into the water and remained up in the mountains all this time, the delay was understandable. Regeneration was highly specialized and came with the attendant cost. Nina would have had to qualify for a grant or be given the treatment by a sympathetic clinic. Even then, if an attempt failed, she'd have had to wait the mandatory 3 years before a second attempt. Today, those sightless eyes seemed to meet his as she shaped her fingers over his face. A tear rolled down her cheek. "Xavier," she whispered again. "Xavier." He took her into his arms even though he knew he should wait, should be sure she wanted him to do so. But he couldn't stand by while Nina cried. "Sure," he whispered, the sound rough because his own throat was thick, his eyes hot. "Hush, my love." He spoke in their shared dialect, a dialect that had only been spoken in a village long destroyed. "Nina, please don't cry." But she continued to sob, and then he realized he was crying too, and they were holding on bruisingly tight to one another. He was vaguely aware of children being drawn away, of the adults leaving, until he was alone with his Nina and she wasn't pushing him away but holding him close. "You were dead," she said in a shaky voice. "They told me you were dead." Again and again she repeated that, stroking his hand over her mass of curling black hair. He kissed her temple, her cheek, the taste of hot salt in his mouth. "I searched," he said. "I searched for so long. Where were you?" Their words merged together until they weren't words any longer. They'd been apart too long to do anything but hold on to each other, rocking. The world was quiet around them, the villagers' voices some distance away, when he and Nina were finally able to breathe enough for more words. Pressing a kiss to her hair, he reached down for her hand, her bones slender and her skin a lusher brown than his. "Walk with me." Her fingers wove into his in a silent answer, and the two of them walked into the verdant greenery around the village, until they were private, alone. Then, his hands cupping her face, Xavier admitted his guilt. "I should have never made you jump." Her hands found his face again, held him with sweet tenderness. "Then I would be dead." Her voice was raw from her tears but resolute. "Everyone died. That's what they said." "Who?" "All the people I asked, and I asked so many." Jagged rasps of breath. The water was so fast, so hard. It swept me far from our village, and at some point, I hit my head and I can't remember what happened next. I know I was taken in by other villagers, but they didn't find me until 4 days after the attack. Her hands kept touching him, as his kept touching her. My rescuers took me to an off-the-grid local clinic and the doctor there did what he could, but I was in bad shape, barely coherent for over 2 months. "Why didn't they take you to a bigger hospital?" Even as he asked the question, Xavier knew the answer. The Psy had been doing fatal damage throughout the region at that time, until the people who called these mountains home no longer trusted the cities or the big hospitals staffed by Psy. Nina said the same, then added, "Even after those 2 months I wasn't quite right. I had broken bones and other injuries that were still healing, but my head was the worst. I couldn't hold on to thoughts, onto memories." She trembled. "For a while I thought I'd never find myself, always be lost, but it came back over the next 8 months. She slid her arms around him once more. Locking his own around her, he said, "You began to ask questions the instant you were yourself again," he said, knowing his Nina. "And people told you everyone had died." A jerky nod. "I didn't believe them. I went back home, but there was no village there. Nothing but an empty landscape cleared of all signs of our families, our friends." "The Psy did that," he told her. "The same Psy whose soldiers murdered everyone we knew." It was important to him to differentiate the one from the group. The years since the attack had taught him that the Psy race wasn't one big entity but millions of separate individuals. Just like him. Just like his Nina. She thumped fisted hands against his chest. "Why didn't you leave me any signs? Why didn't you tell people you were alive?" He wanted to shield her, couldn't. "I took a telepathic hit," he said, and felt her flinch. "When I came to, everyone was dead and I knew the Psy would be back to clean up." He swallowed. "I couldn't bury anyone, or it would have alerted them to possible survivors. God forgive me for that choice." "You could have never buried so many, Xavier," Nina said softly. "God knows your heart." Holding on tight to her words, he said, "I haunted the mountains searching for you and eventually joined up with a small group of rebels who'd made it their life's work to sabotage or destroy all Psy operations in the area. Those men and women had been driven by the same need for vengeance that had kept Xavier alive at the start, even through the worst despair. I stayed nearby for 3 months, but my work with the rebels eventually took me some distance away in the opposite direction to this village, unknowingly separating him from his heart. When I was shot in an operation, they doctored me until I could take care of my own wounds, then left me in a cave with enough supplies to see me through. Injured as he was, the rebels had considered him dead weight. I couldn't move more than a few meters for over a month." He tried to crawl to his devastated village at one point, wanting to die on home ground, only to be forced to turn back after he came dangerously close to unconsciousness. No one in his condition could survive a night in the cold of the mountains without some kind of shelter. Even knowing he'd never have made it, Xavier wanted to tell his younger self to keep crawling, to find his way back to the village and to Nina. By the time I returned, the nearby villages had been long deserted and people farther out knew nothing. His shoulder muscles knotted, his fist clenching in her hair. I asked over and over. Yet the mountains were big, and back then the people who called it home often moved because of fear or need or environmental factors, a multitude of reasons. It wasn't improbable that Nina hadn't spoken to any of those same people when she came to look for him, especially since she'd returned long after him. "Why do they call you Ani?" he asked, his heart in a painful vice. "It's what my rescuers named me at the time when I wasn't myself. And after. When I thought everyone was dead, that you were dead, I didn't want to be Nina again." A heartbreaking answer that betrayed the depth of her pain. "I searched for you," he said, needing her to know, to believe. "I've been true, loved no other." Falling to his knees as her tears began to flow again, he dared say the words he'd held inside for so long. "Say you'll forgive me, Nina." "Xavier." Going to her knees in front of him, she shook her head and his heart sank. his world narrowing to only her face and to this instant that might forever break him. There is no need for forgiveness. He took a harsh breath, another. I know you did what you did out of love. Her kiss was a benediction. I love you, Xavier. I've listened for your voice even after the world convinced me you were dead. Her fingers shaped his lips. I've loved no one but you. Shaking, he was the one who fell into her embrace this time. She held him with love in every breath. My Xavier. The regeneration might not work, she said to him a long time later, as she sat cradled against his chest while he leaned his back up against a sturdy tree with dark green leaves. This is the second and final attempt. He was happy to hear no worry in her tone that he'd feel differently about her. She knew he loved her, regardless of her physical appearance or health. You're revered as a nurse. I have an apprentice who acts as my eyes, and together we manage. She was more than managing, he thought, considering the fidelity she'd engendered in people used to being loyal only to those they'd known all their lives. I have connections now, Nina. I can get you to better doctors if you want. I've learned to live how I am, even thrive, but I could do my work better with both eyes or at least some vision. Her fingers grazed his jaw. I'm selfish too. I want to see you again. Joy was a sweet pain through his veins. Then we'll find the best specialists. He knew Judd and Caleb would both help him without question. Family, he'd learned, had many different faces. His now included two Psi with deadly abilities. There are others here, Nina said. So many people still isolated, disbelieving of the changes within the Psi, and unwilling to return to the lives they abandoned in order to survive. Many need proof they won't be murdered should they return to their lands. Others need medical help, access to wider education. I'm with you. Xavier had fought beside his friends for years. Now it was his time to walk beside Nina. He'd said goodbye to his parishioners at the outset of this journey, wanting to go into it with his whole heart and soul. But he hadn't abandoned them. Never would he do that to people who had given him as much succor as he had them. He'd left them in the gentle, capable hands of a young woman of God, who was ready for her own congregation. She had strength enough to offer a shoulder to those in need and heart enough to open it to any soul that walked through the door. He was at peace with his decision to leave San Francisco, could think of no better life than to live it beside Nina. I'll call on every favor, I have to help the people who kept you safe until I could find you again. Until he could hold her close again, his heart beating in time with her own. Will you ever ask me? Nina chided an hour later. Really, Xavier, you're taking the concept of becoming your own man first too far. His smile was startled joy on his face, memories cascading through him of a young Nina rolling her dark eyes when he proudly told her he'd ask for her hand only when he could build her a home worthy of her spirit. I think we've both waited long enough. Reaching for his necklace, he tore it off to drop a ring formed of gold, and set with sapphires and diamonds onto his palm. He'd bought it years earlier, after he came to San Francisco and found a steady position. Being a second Reformation priest didn't pay much, but Xavier hadn't needed to spend much either. He'd saved it all for Nina's ring. The stones were small but the delicate beauty of them perfectly fit her bone structure. He reached from behind to lift her hand. Will you marry me, Nina? Today if you arrange it, was her answer, her smile as radiant as the moon. 2 days later, when Xavier called Judd to ask for assistance in getting specialist help for the woman who would soon be his wife, he got far more than he'd bargained for. Judd not only put him directly on the phone with the snowdancer healer, who was then able to get Nina into treatment at the best facility in the world, the other man spoke to his alpha, and Xavier was suddenly in touch with the Azure Sun leopards. The leopards' connection to Snowdancer came through the Snowdancer DarkRiver pact, with the Azure Sun alpha, Isabella, the grandmother of a DarkRiver sentinel. And, he was proudly told by said alpha, the namesake of one of 3 newborn members of DarkRiver. My great-grandchildren, the alpha had said, while appearing not the least like a great-grandmother. Isabella Garcia was a powerful alpha who held the loyalty of her people, despite being in her 8th decade. Even Xavier hadn't realized changelings didn't always go for physical strength in an alpha. Wisdom was also treasured, with the sentinels acting as the alpha's physical arm. While Azure Sun's power base was in another part of South America, they had contacts in Xavier's region on whom he could call should he have the need. They also gave him permission to access certain resources that would help ease his and Nina's journey, as they fought to undo the damage that had been done to the people of these mountains. My granddaughter's alpha, young cub though he is, Isabella had said, has taught me the value of relationships beyond the pack, of treating neighbors like family. It had taken Xavier a minute to realize the young cub was Lucas Hunter, one of the most visible and powerful men in the world, thanks not only to his pack's strength, but also because of who and what he represented in the Trinity Accord. And Xavier was connected into that network. All because of a friendship formed with a soldier he'd first seen in a nameless bar. Then Caleb called him, having been alerted by Judd, and Xavier had access to a teleport anytime he needed one to take Nina to the physicians. That wasn't the only thing. I have wealth no one could spend in a single lifetime or even 10 lifetimes, the Cardinal said. I've created a charitable foundation with a significant endowment that you can use at will for your humanitarian work. Thank you, my friend. Xavier accepted the generosity without argument because he understood how big a step this was for Caleb. This friend of Xavier's didn't trust easily, much less allow people into his life. For him to offer such a gift was a precious thing. Is your Sahara well? Yes. Caleb's tone didn't soften as another man's might have when he spoke of his lover, but Xavier understood this friend of his. Knew Sahara Kyriakis was his heart. And your Nina? Caleb asked.
Shavies Milat.
Yes. Later, as he walked under a carpet of stars with Nina, their hands linked in her warm, earthy scent so sweetly familiar, he said, I wrote you letters. Soft laughter. Finally. Her teasing made him feel young, wild, free. I'll read them all once I can see. He couldn't help but clasp her hand tighter. I'd like to read you some now. Before they wed, before it was too late for Nina to back away. I want you to know what I've done. Who I've become. Gentle reproof in her expression. My love for you will never fade. Xavier had no doubts of the truth of her vow, but he still needed her to understand how much he'd altered from the laughing young man she'd known. Didn't want to steal her with false promises. So he read out the letters that spoke of battle, of violence, of his friendship with Judd and Caleb. I'd like to meet your friends. Nina's hand remained firm in his. We've both been marked by life, Xavier, but we haven't changed where it matters. She lifted their clasped hands to his heart, then to hers. Yes. They continued to walk together, content to simply be with each other. He spoke at times, Nina at others. At one point he said, I once told one of my friends that love is the greatest form of loyalty, but I think from loyalty can come love. Of course. Turning into him, she laid her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, as he so often found himself simply watching her breathe. So many bonds, he murmured as the two of them stood under a night sky that reminded him of Caleb's cardinal eyes. So many connections. Our world is becoming the interlinked entity it was always meant to be. The majority of those connections were fragile, breakable, or barely budded, but a rare few had passed the Rubicon would endure. Such as the bonds that linked him to Judd and to Caleb, the bonds that linked Judd to his mate and his pack, the bond that linked Caleb to Sahara, and through her to another pack. Such was the bond that tied Xavier to his Nina, and through her to all the villagers she knew. In return he could link her to so many others. Together their family spanned continents. And it existed right here in this moment when he held Nina.